I was booking our surprise honeymoon tickets to Paris when the cops called. They told me my girlfriend Emily, who was supposed to be my wife in 2 weeks, was dead. The official ruling was suicide. But all I could really hear was that the light of my life was gone forever. My whole world shattered. I basically lived in bed for months. I lost my job and became such a wreck that my mom eventually moved in with me just to keep an eye on things. She wouldn't take no for an answer, and stayed until I finally agreed to start seeing a therapist named Daisy every weekend. The first few sessions went fine. I picked up 3 jobs just so I wouldn't be alone with my thoughts. But about 6 months in, Daisy called me out. She said I'd gotten too good at pretending I was recovering without actually doing the work. Her advice was to get out of the city and go somewhere I couldn't distract myself. She pushed this hiking flyer across the table. It was for a weekend retreat in northern Colorado run by a group called ClearPath. The entire thing focused on reconnecting with what matters. It was expensive, but Daisy insisted I needed it. So I paid the non-refundable deposit so I wouldn't back out later. 6 of us met in a parking lot at the trailhead on a Friday afternoon. Richard, our guide, was maybe in his mid-40s, quiet-spoken, and looked like he knew the mountains well. During the introduction, he said the weekend was designed to help us confront what we were running from. Immediately, Emily's face flashed through my mind, and I almost got back into my car. But the deposit was gone either way, so I stayed. The first day was pretty chill. The hike itself was easy, and the group was mostly decent. Thankfully, nobody was trying too hard to become instant best friends. There was a woman named Claire, who kept mostly to herself, a couple from Fort Collins who wouldn't stop talking, and a guy named Brett, who complained about his boots nonstop for the first hour before Richard finally told him to shut up. We set up camp beside a ravine that evening, and I passed out almost immediately. Around midnight, I woke to muffled sobbing somewhere out in the trees. I stayed still for a minute, making sure it was actually a person before I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. About 100 feet from camp, Claire stood alone in the darkness, with her back turned to me. She was still wearing her sleep clothes beneath her jacket. "Hey," I called softly. "You all right?" When she turned around, her face looked pale as a corpse and twisted with disgust.
Richard told me what you did.
She sobbed. I froze. "What?" Without another word, she stormed past me and headed back toward camp, while I stood there alone with my flashlight pointed at the dirt, trying to figure out what the hell she meant. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe she'd had a nightmare or overheard some conversation and misunderstood it. By the time I finally crawled back into my sleeping bag, I'd almost convinced myself everything was fine. The next morning, though, I knew something was wrong. The second I walked up to any conversation, it died. Everyone stared at me like I'd grown a second head, and whenever Richard caught my eye, he'd give me this strange little smirk, like we shared some secret. I kept trying to tell myself I was being paranoid until I dug through my backpack for my water filter and found a folded piece of paper I knew hadn't been there before. I unfolded it. "We know about Emily." My hands immediately started shaking. Nobody could know anything about Emily. I was sure we'd been the only people there when it happened. Emily and I had been drifting apart for weeks before she died. She'd recently lost her job and wanted to postpone the wedding until things got stabilized. I wanted to move forward with our plans anyway. Our last argument happened on a hiking trail overlooking a ridge maybe 40 minutes from her apartment. She tried to walk away from me, and I grabbed her arm. When she jerked free, she lost her footing on the loose gravel near the edge. I called 911 and waited for the police, but I lied. I told them we'd been hiking separately and that I'd only heard the fall. I never mentioned the argument. Emily was barely breathing when they pulled her out. The investigation lasted 11 days before the police eventually ruled her death a suicide, based on things she'd written in her journals. Ever since then, the guilt had been crushing me, but I was positive nobody knew the truth. I didn't sleep at all that night. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Richard whispering to someone outside my tent. "He still refuses to admit it," he said quietly. "Even after all this time." Without thinking, I lunged from my sleeping bag, grabbed my backpack and headlamp, and bolted into the trees. I just ran. The sun was already rising by the time I stumbled out at the bottom of the trail. I was exhausted and shaking violently when I spotted a ranger station and practically dragged myself inside. The ranger was a woman in her 50s. She listened carefully while I told her everything. When I finished, she typed something into her computer.
"There's no permit for a Clearpath retreat this weekend."
I told her she had to be mistaken. She checked again. Still nothing.
Well, if you've been alone out there, who exactly were you talking to?
She said carefully. I immediately told her I hadn't been alone. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the note, and handed it to her. I watched her unfold it with my own eyes. Then she looked back up at me.
"Sir, the paper is blank,"
she said gently. My head started buzzing. I completely broke down, screaming that I wasn't lying. The ranger called 911. I was admitted to a psychiatric ward later that day. Once the medication started working, the entire Clearpath experience began to dissolve. The guilt had finally broken something in me. Eventually, I confessed everything about the fight with Emily and the lie I told police. But because the official ruling on her death remained suicide, there was never going to be a trial waiting for me. Instead, they admitted me into intensive therapy. Now, I'm learning to live with the reality of what happened, because in the end, my own mind became the jury. Ruth and I have been married for 6 years, and I'd be lying if I said the last 2 hadn't been a little rough. Not in a bad marriage kind of way, more like a ships passing in the night kind of way. She runs brand strategy at a mid-sized agency in Charlotte and got promoted to director around the same time I left my corporate job to get my logistics software company off the ground. Suddenly, we were both working 80-hour weeks, and most of our real conversations happened over cold takeout at 10 o'clock at night. So, when a project she'd been running for 8 months wrapped ahead of schedule on a Thursday and she called me during lunch to say she had a long weekend free, I closed my laptop and told her to start packing. We drove down to western North Carolina that same evening and found a motel in a small town called Brevard. That night, we had a real dinner together for the first time in probably 3 months. The hiking was actually her idea. There was a trail map in the motel lobby with a route circled in pen and a handwritten note taped beside it that read, "Worth it." Neither of us were serious hikers, but we had the boots and the time, so we figured, why not? We hit the trail early Saturday morning. The first few hours were exactly what we needed. The air felt clean, and for once, our phones were off. A couple of hours in, Ruth stopped and pointed out that we'd missed the trail marker we were supposed to watch for at least 20 minutes earlier. Neither of us had realized we'd hiked that far past it. "It's fine. The sun's still up. We can find our way back easily," I told her as I started walking again. About an hour later, I noticed everything had gone completely silent. The birds had stopped chirping. Even the wind wasn't moving through the trees. Ruth instinctively grabbed my hand and slowed down.
Ethan?
She pointed with a shaky finger. I followed her gaze and spotted a figure standing between the trees about 30 feet ahead of us. At first, I thought it was another hiker who'd stopped to check their phone or look at something. Then, the woman stepped farther into view, and I actually saw her. My stomach dropped. She was barefoot, wearing a thin, pale green hospital gown. The entire front of it was smeared with dirt and what looked like dried blood. A plastic hospital wristband still hung from her left wrist. Then, I noticed her neck. A row of stitches ran along the side of it, maybe 3 inches long. The skin around them looked bruised and swollen, as if the wound had been stitched recently. It took me a second to find my voice. I called out, asking if she was okay and whether she needed help. She glanced at Ruth first, before her eyes settled on me. and then she smiled.
You should come with me. I want to show you something.
Ruth immediately stepped in front of me.
Step back.
The woman's smile widened. Then she started clapping and laughing to herself like a lunatic. Between bursts of laughter, she slowly raised one hand and pointed toward a gnarly, crooked tree off to our left.
After I'm done taking your husband, I'll hang your body from that tree.
Ruth stiffened beside me. My skin crawled. We turned around and hurried back down the trail as fast as we could, without outright running. Behind us, we could hear her bare feet brushing through the leaves. She was following us, softly humming some kind of children's tune. Every few seconds, she said my name and begged me to stop and come with her.
I really have to show it. Come with me.
At first, her voice stayed calm and almost gentle, but the farther we got, the more it began to crack and warp until she sounded furious and desperate all at once. Then, she bolted. She grabbed me from behind and locked her arms around my chest. Her grip was impossibly tight. Even though I'm 5'5" and she was barefoot with fresh stitches in her neck, she dragged me sideways off the trail like I weighed nothing. Ruth was screaming beside me, and I was yelling and clawing at the woman's arms, desperate to break free, but I couldn't. My boots slid helplessly through the dirt. She nearly dragged me past the tree line when I heard a loud crack. Her arms went limp instantly, and she dropped like a stone. Ruth had grabbed a fallen branch from the ground and smashed it against the side of the woman's head. We ran the rest of the way back to the car without stopping. Ruth called 911 from the parking area while I sat in the passenger seat with my hands shaking, trying to remember how to breathe. We kept telling ourselves she was probably some escaped psychiatric patient who wandered onto the trail, because that was the only explanation that made any sense. Officers searched that section of the trail later that night. They combed through the entire area, including around that crooked tree she'd pointed at. All they found was the hospital gown lying in the dirt where she'd fallen. It was soaked through with blood. They found no sign of the woman herself, no footprints, no trail leading away. The wristband was still lying on the ground beside the gown. When they ran the ID, it came back to a patient who'd been discharged from a facility about 90 miles west a few days earlier. Current whereabouts unknown. I've gone back and forth ever since over what she actually was, but the truth is, I genuinely don't know. Life eventually slipped back into the usual grind of endless meetings and late-night takeout. But every now and then, in the dead of night or whenever we try to plan another getaway, the memory of that woman creeps back into our heads, and it always leads us to the same questions we can't answer. Who was she? What exactly did she want? And what the hell was she so desperate to show me? For most of my adult life, I worked insurance claims out of a beige cubicle on the third floor of the Liberty Mutual Regional Office in Scranton, pushing paperwork for people I'd never actually met. The job was every bit as soul-crushing as it sounds. The Appalachian Trails were always my way of hitting the reset button. It wasn't really a hobby or a fitness thing. It was just the only reliable way I'd found to quiet my mind after stepping out of college and joining the corporate herd. About 3 years ago, I found a trail deep in the mountains of West Virginia that I'd never even heard of before. I stumbled across it on a hiking forum where some guy described it as barely maintained and worth every step. He didn't post any pictures, but the comments were full of people talking about how isolated and middle of nowhere the place felt. I had to check it out. So the minute I got a 3-day weekend, I packed my gear, said goodbye to my girlfriend, and drove straight there. At first glance, the trail looked like any other standard dirt path cutting through the woods. But maybe an hour in, I stepped into a clearing that stopped me dead in my tracks. A campsite had been completely destroyed. 2 tents were ripped open, as if someone had shredded paper bags, the fabric hanging in long strips. Sleeping bags were dragged through the mud and tossed everywhere. Somebody had even dismantled the fire pit entirely, kicking burning charcoal across the clearing and leaving black scorch marks spiderwebbed through the dirt. Near one of the tents, a massive duck lay in the mud with its head chopped off. Its blood had sprayed across the canvas in a wide arc. My mouth went dry. I stood there for a full minute, trying to make sense of the scene. Gotta be a bear attack, I muttered to myself. The campers probably packed and bolted, leaving all their gear behind. I kept repeating that explanation in my head until I finally calmed down enough to keep moving. The place felt deeply wrong, but strangely enough, it shut off all the noise in my head. The sun had already started turning a deep orange, and I knew I only had about an hour and a half before darkness completely swallowed the trail. Then, I saw it. A soft yellow glow hanging maybe 30 feet off the path between the trees. It wasn't moving around like a flashlight. It stayed perfectly still. At first, I figured somebody had hung a lantern from a branch. Maybe it belonged to the people from the wrecked campsite, or maybe it was some kind of trail marker left by a ranger. My brain kept feeding me excuses like that while I stepped off the path and walked toward it. As I got closer, the birds suddenly exploded from the trees all at once, shrieking and scattering into the sky like something had startled them. I stopped and scanned the tree line, but I couldn't see anything moving, so I kept going. About 5 minutes later, I heard rustling in the leaves to my left, perfectly matching the pace of my footsteps. I slowed down. The sound slowed down too. I tried convincing myself it was just a deer, but my skin prickled and my heartbeat sped up. Finally, I stepped beneath the light and looked up at the source. It was a small incandescent bulb wired to a car battery sitting at the base of the tree, swaying slightly in the breeze. Around me, the entire forest had gone silent. Then, thunk, something punched straight through my left arm just below the shoulder. For one confused second, I didn't understand what had happened. Then, the pain hit. An unbearable, blinding ache exploded through my arm, as if someone were trying to tear it off my body. I hit the dirt, face first, screaming and writhing in agony. A booming laugh erupted from somewhere above me. I rolled over and looked up. A man sat perched on a thick tree branch, maybe 15 feet overhead. His hair was wild, and his beard hung so low it brushed the bark beneath him. One leg dangled lazily, while a crossbow rested across his knee. He laughed hysterically, slapping his hand against his leg like he'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. The second he started climbing down, I forced myself to my feet and ran. My left arm hung uselessly at my side. The bolt was still lodged inside it, and every movement sent waves of pain through my body. But I ran anyway. Behind me, I could hear him crashing through the woods and laughing the entire time. Another bolt whipped past my head, missing my ear by inches before slamming into a tree trunk ahead of me. I sprinted harder, blindly crashing through the darkness. Branches whipped across my face, roots snagged my boots and nearly sent me sprawling. I could barely see where I was stepping, but he was close. I could feel him behind me. My lungs burned. Then, suddenly, the trees thinned out beneath my feet, and I felt gravel instead of dirt. A pickup truck was coming down the road. I practically threw myself into the headlights, waving my good arm like a lunatic until the truck finally screeched to a stop. The farmer behind the wheel saw the state of my arm and drove me straight to the county hospital. He even let me use his phone to call 911 on the way there. Doctors had to remove the bolt during surgery. Now I've got 2 small scars on the front and back of my left shoulder as permanent souvenirs for being reckless and stupid. The police searched the section of the trail later. They found the destroyed campsite, the car battery, and the hanging light bulb. But the man and his crossbow were long gone. I haven't set foot in West Virginia since then, and I definitely don't hike alone anymore. Some nights, sitting beneath those buzzing office lights in my cubicle, I catch myself thinking maybe this kind of life isn't actually so bad after all. But mostly, I think about that yellow light swaying between the trees, how warm and inviting it looked, and how obvious a trap it should have been.